Hello and welcome. Today's presentation, I'll be talking to you about a coup without firing a shot, the pandemic's impact on reality. Global pandemic brought an unprecedented changes to our physical reality, challenging the very foundations of society. What began as a severe respiratory illness soon spiraled into a series of events that reshaped the world as we knew it. Emergency measures and restrictions from school and business closures to forced masking were swiftly implemented, often with little regard for scientific evidence. The vaccine saga, promise and failure. First, there was high hopes. As the pandemic raged on, the development and promotion of vaccines were hailed as a solution to restore normalcy. With massive funding and accelerated trials, multiple vaccine candidates were swiftly rolled out, offering a glimmer of hope to a world weary of lockdowns and restrictions. However, there were adverse reactions. Reports of severe adverse reactions and deaths following vaccinations soon surfaced, and this caused a lot of doubt on the safety and efficacy of these hastily developed products. Critics who raised concern faced a fierce backlash from media and financial interests, further fueling public skepticism. Waning immunity. Even for those who initially received the vaccine, the promise of immunity proved fleeting. Waning protection and the emergence of new variants necessitated repeated booster shots, leading many to question the long-term viability of this approach. Then came the rise of biosecurity state. Surveillance expansion, corporate consolidation, and censorship and control. Under the guise of public health, governments and corporations rapidly expanded their surveillance capabilities, implementing new measures to monitor and control the populace. From contact tracing apps to facial recognition systems, privacy concerns took a backseat to perceived security needs. The pandemic also accelerated the consolidation of corporate power, with many small businesses collapsing under the weight of lockdowns while big tech companies thrived. This shift in economic dynamics further cemented the influence of a few powerful entities over daily life. Perhaps most alarmingly, free speech and open discourse were curtailed as dissenting voices faced censorship and deplatforming. Narratives deemed misinformation were suppressed, with tech giants and government agencies effectively controlling the flow of information. This opened the political Pandora's box. It used pandemic as a cover. As the world grappled with the health crisis, some political actors seized the opportunity for implementing controversial electoral strategies under the cover of pandemic. From mail-in voting expansions to poll monitoring restrictions, the integrity of the democratic process came under scrutiny. Uniform messaging, adding to the suspicion, a remarkable uniformity in political messaging and enforcement emerged across the nations, with leaders worldwide echoing strikingly similar narratives and policies. The global synchronization raised eyebrows among those questioning the true motives behind the pandemic response. This led to public distrust. Public trust in traditional institutions and authorities plummeted. Once respected entities like the media, academia, and public health organizations found themselves embroiled in scandals and credibility crises, fueling widespread skepticism and conspiracy theories. The intellectual and psychological fallout. This was caused by questionable science, censorship backlash, and a cultural withdrawal. The pandemic response was marred by questionable scientific leadership and a disregard for natural immunity. Public health recommendations often proved impractical, while potential lab origins of the virus and other scandals emerged, further eroding public confidence. Censorship intensified. Critical discussion on topics like bioweapons research were suppressed, leading to the emergence of new theories and scrutiny from the public. Security and intelligence agencies, rather than public health entities, took the lead in surveillance efforts, raising the red flags. In the face of such turmoil, many intellectuals and journalists retreated. They avoided controversial truths and left the general public confused and disillusioned with official narratives. A pervasive sense of skepticism and distrust permeated society as civil liberties eroded under the weight of political crises. The institutional response and advocacy, documentation efforts. As the pandemic unfolded, institutions like the Brownstone Institute recognized the need to thoroughly document and analyze the unprecedented events. Their efforts aim to preserve historical records and offer alternative perspectives amidst the prevailing narratives. Recognizing the extensive changes sweeping across societies, these organizations encourage open and critical discussions on the pandemic's broader implications. They provided platforms for dissenting voices and promoted scrutiny of official policies and actions. Beyond documentation and discourse, advocacy groups issued a call to action, urging individuals and communities to actively encourage encountering the erosion of civil liberties and the obfuscation of truth. They emphasize the importance of historical documentation and active resistance to the prevailing narratives. The economic upheaval included global inflation, small business collapses, and government overreach. One of the most visible consequences of the pandemic response was a surge in global inflation. With supply chains disrupting, businesses shuttered, and government spending skyrocketing, prices for consumer goods and services soared. This eroded their purchasing power and living standards for millions. While large corporations and tech giants thrived, during the lockdown, small business bore the brunt of the economic fallout. Countless mom and pop establishments, from local restaurants to independent retailers, were forced to shutter their doors, and they're unable to withstand the prolonged closures and restrictions, which was really ridiculous for the government to do that. Because the government overreached. The pandemic, they served a convenient pretext for government to expand their reach and influence over the economy. They sent bailouts, stimulus packages, and enhanced regulatory powers, granted authorities unprecedented control over the economic activities. And this raised concern about the overreach and potential long-term consequences. And thus we have the censorship conundrum, the social media purge. As the pandemic unfolded, social media platforms embarked on a widespread purge of content deemed misinformation or dangerous. Accounts and posts questioning official narratives or alternative perspectives were swiftly removed, effectively silencing dissenting voices. The traditional media, once champions of free speech, became complicit in this censorship campaign. Instead of fostering open disclosure, they often parroted official narratives and marginalized those who dared question the status quo. Then you had internet manipulation. Beyond content removal, there were concerning reports of search engines manipulating and algorithms suppressing certain topics and viewpoints. So if you disagreed with the narrative, you would never show up on a search. This subtle form of censorship made it increasingly difficult for users to access alternative information and engage in critical thinking. There's only one point of view. Erosion of trust. This includes institutional credibility, politicization of science, and conspiracy theories. As the pandemic unfolded, traditional institutions like media, academic, and public health organizations suffered severe credibility crisis. First of all, their handling of the crisis was riddled with inconsistencies, flip-flops, and apparent conflicts of interest, and it eroded the public trust to unprecedented levels. The politicization of science further exacerbated the trust deficit, with scientific narratives seemingly shifting to align with the political agendas. Many began to question the objectivity and integrity of the information they were receiving from expert sources. In the vacuum of this trust and transparency, conspiracy theories flourished. From suspicion about the virus origin to speculation about nefarious global agendas, the lack of credible information fueled rampant speculation and distrust among the public. Can't trust what you're hearing. And then there was a severe intellectual retreat. There was fear of controversy. As the pandemic unfolded, many intellectuals and journalists choose to retreat from controversial topics, opting for safer narratives to avoid scrutiny of official accounts. The fear of backlash, censorship, and professional consequences loomed large, stifling critical analysis and opening discourse. Then you had self-censorship. Even among those who harbored doubts or alternative perspectives, self-censorship became prevalent. The perceived risks of speaking out were deemed too high, leading to chilling effect on free expression and the exchange of ideas. People who might have had a good idea just kept silent because they didn't want to go against the flow. Then you had the disconnect from the public. This intellectual retreat widened the gap between the public and the traditional arbiters of knowledge and information. As the general population grappled with confusion and disillusionment, many felt abandoned by the very individuals and institutions they once trusted to shed light on complex issues. The pandemic origins controversy. Initially, it was dismissed. In the early stages, the possible leak from a lab of SARS-CoV-2 virus was dismissed by many experts and authorities. Oh no, that didn't happen. The narrative of natural zoonotic spillover from animals to humans was firmly established, and dissenting voices were marginalized or ridiculed. Whoops. However, as time passed, there was evidence and revelations began to challenge the official narrative. Investigations uncovered potential safety lapses and gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, raising legitimate concerns about a possible lab accident. Despite the growing body of evidence, discussion around the lab leak theory were actively suppressed and censored by social media. As public pressure mounted, officials' investigations into the pandemic's origin were launched through many criticized their lack of transparency and independence. The controversy remains still unresolved, with debates continuing to rage over the need for a thorough, impartial inquiry into the virus's origins. The rise of alternative media, distrust in the mainstream. As the mainstream media's credibility eroded during the pandemic, many turned to alternative sources for information and analysis. Independent journalists, bloggers, and podcasters gained significant followings by offering perspectives often suppressed or ignored by the traditional outlets. There was censorship resistance. These alternative media platforms became crucial in circumventing the censorship and control extorted by the tech giants and government entities. By leveraging decentralized technologies and peer-to-peer networks, they ensured the free flow of information and ideas, even in the face of concerted suppression efforts. The challenging of the narratives. Beyond providing alternative sources of information, these independent media outlets played a vital role in challenging official narratives and holding authorities accountable. Their willingness to ask the tough questions and explore the controversial topics filled the void left by the increasingly complacent mainstream media. The global synchronization conundrum. Uniform policies, centralized influence, and geopolitical agendas. One of the most perplexing aspects of the pandemic response was the remarkable uniformity in policies and messaging adopted by the governments across the globe. From lockdowns and mask mandates to vaccine rollouts and censorship measures, the synchronization among nations was striking, and it raised questions about the true drivers behind these coordinated actions. Theories emerged suggesting the influence of a centralized global entity such as the World Health Organization or other supernatural organizations in shaping and directing the pandemic response. Critics argue that these entities wielded disproportionate influence over national policies, and it undermined the sovereignty of individual nations. If one was wrong, they all got it wrong, and they don't care. They just wanted to have the power. Others speculated the pandemic was being exploited to advance a broader geopolitical agenda, with powerful nations and alliances using the crisis as a means of consolidating power and influence on the global scale. The synchronization of policies and narratives fuel concerns about the erosion of national autonomy and the rise of a new world order. And that concludes my discussion for today. I hope you watched and start questioning the narratives now. And thanks for watching.